Continue with, again, I've entitled this set of slides, Problems with Prophecy. So we'll continue with that. And again, the goal is, I'm telegraphing my position in that I'm in the already not yet camp. I believe the kingdom is here and will be consummated in the future. Beyond that, those are the certainties. I mean, that reflects the stuff that I don't see how anybody can read the New Testament and not get those thoughts. The details, and there are lots of details that people are interested in, and lots of things that, the Old New Testament talks about, that become sort of, areas of disagreement, areas of friction, or things to think about. I think those are sort of window dressing to the more important areas. One of those, of course, is the idea of a rapture. Now, I'm hoping, I don't know what anybody's position is here, and again, I don't really care. What my goal is to show you that no view of this, even down to the whether there is such a thing as a rapture at all or not, no view of this is self-evident. Again, you don't just open your Bible and out pops my view. The Bible says so. The Bible tells me so. That's just fallacious, and if on a cranky day I would call it shallow. But since I'm not real cranky today, I'll just call it fallacious.
And what does that mean?
False.
Okay.
It's a fallacy. It's a logical fallacy. It doesn't mean the idea is false. It means the assumption that it's secure and certain and self-evident. The real question, as we'll see, is, are you a splitter or a joiner? You have to decide that. There is no footnote, there is no appendix in your Bible that tells you which one to be. You say, what do you mean splitter or joiner? Well, let's jump in here and you'll find out. Illustration. Someone you're trying to disciple stops you after church and asks why the Gospels don't agree on what was written on the sign nailed to Jesus' cross. She wonders how the Gospel writers couldn't get something like that right. One or all of them must be wrong, because they all don't agree. So how do you answer? Well, let's ask you. Pick any of these sorts of issues where passage A and passage B don't quite say the same thing. What's the natural sort of way to, that most people who care about such things how would they approach that?
MikePizer.com.
Yeah, there were come on. That's a poor answer.
The microphone, she said go on MichaelHeiser.com.
Yeah, and I said it was a poor answer. So, okay, and I heard that. What did you? Okay, you mean the 4 go into 2? Because there's 4 of them.
There's 4 different interpretations of what was written.
Okay. What you're doing is I think what you're doing is saying they all say the same thing. But I don't really like the word interpretation, at least for my purposes here.
Well, I give a sermon, I ask 4 different people what I said, and I come up with 4 different answers.
Right. Now let's say you
Repeat
do that.
that for the tape. You didn't go.
Okay, he said when he preaches a sermon, and he asks people what he said, he'll get 4 different versions of what he said. Okay.
But this was written.
It doesn't matter. Okay.
It doesn't matter.
See, here's the thing. That needs to be followed by this question. Those 4 people you talk to after church, they might all be correct. Because they might be remembering select parts. Nobody's going to remember the entire whole and say it, even if they did, say it precisely the same way. But none of them are wrong. They're all right in different ways. So if you look at the superscriptions, they all disagree, but they're all pretty close too. So we have, this is Jesus, King of the Jews, the King of the Jews, this is the King of the Jews, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. They all share King of the Jews, and some of them either omit or add a little something else. You know, like here's the name, and then here's the name up here. So most scholars would look at this, again, people who care about the integrity of the record here, or who know that there would be poor thinking in regards to the integrity here, would say, look, chances are it said all this stuff. And the writers just, it's 30, 40 years later, they're recollecting it. Some of them might, somebody might get the entire thing, even though this one doesn't have this down here. They're all correct in that it conceivably either captures what was there or remembers only parts of what was there. But there's no false statement made, that sort of thing. Yes, sir?
Wasn't it written in several languages?
He needs to go to the microphone.
Yes. The question is, wasn't it written in several languages? Right? Yeah. I mean, it was, and you could. It's a fair bet that Luke probably knew Greek and Latin. Again, this is the Greco-Roman world. He's a Gentile, so I don't think we could really give him Hebrew or Aramaic. But the others were either at least bilingual and perhaps trilingual as well. So they could have been recollecting something from one of the other languages. It's possible. Let me give you a modern illustration. This is months ago, but Speaker Bonner on the House budget deal.
Bingo.
3 sources, New York Times, Politico, and Reuters, were at the same press conference when Bonner is describing the House budget deal, and this is how they report it. We fought to keep government spending down because it really will, in fact, help create a better environment for job creators. This is the best deal we can get out of them. I am pleased Senator Reid and I in the White House have been able to come to an agreement, blah, 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 blah. Who's wrong?
They all are. It's political trash.
Okay, not politically. That was a great comeback. Who's wrong in terms of the reporting of the event and what was said? None of them are wrong. They're just it's selective. They're just putting what they want to put in because they have a word count. They're writing their story.
And an agenda.
Right. They have an agenda. There's any number of factors and parameters that go into why a writer selects what he selects to communicate a thought. And the Gospels are no different. But here's what I want you to get. What I just described to you is the process or the impulse, or both, of harmonization. I joined them.
Mm-hmm.
I melded them into each other. This is something that happens. Okay, it would be unusual to pick up an academic commentary written again by someone loosely evangelical, loosely conservative. Again, someone who you don't even have to be conservative. I mean, there are critics who just know something this obvious. Okay. The overwhelming tendency is to harmonize things because we just know this is how life works. A la right here. It happens all the time. I remember when the first war in Iraq started, I saved newspapers from that event. If I went back and looked at them now, and you could do the same thing with September 11th, 2001. Same event, and something that is just forefront in the consciousness of the public mind. Saw it repeatedly over and over and over again. If you look at the news stories of that day and that event, nobody's going to have it exactly the same, include all the same elements with all the same words. Question. If you had 3 newspapers from 3 different parts of the country, and you read their account of September 11th, the Twin Towers event, and they all did contain all the same elements and all the same words, what would you think? Either the same person's writing all three, or there's a whole lot of plagiarizing going on. Okay, I know when I get papers from students, and I save all of them, and there's a reason I ask them to be submitted digitally. I can search them. I can put them all in a little folder and search them simultaneously. It's so convenient. I know, I also read them. If I see a paper, and this has happened to me, that there's just an overwhelming amount of agreement, I immediately am not a joiner. Yeah, I'm not, oh, this is just, it's just two people working separately, and they just happen to be really, no. I mean, I'm thinking that we've got plagiarism going on here. So it's a good thing to have the disparity, both in terms of, especially in terms of the New Testament, because it tells you they're not copying off each other. Right? They're not, one guy didn't write this and it's like, oh man, I want a gospel too. I want my name on a book. I'm going to go. That is not what happened. So it's important to have the difference. But again, that's the tendency to bring together, again, to join, to harmonize. That is a critical issue for the rapture thing, because there are a whole number of descriptions, Old and New Testament, about the coming of the Lord, the day of the Lord, the coming, Jesus' return and all this stuff. And if you harmonize them, you have one event. It's called the second coming. If you separate them, you have two events. One's called the rapture, the other one's called the second coming. That is a decision you make in your head. So the typical pre-mill, pre-trib rapture view, again, church age, rapture here, 7-year tribulation, then we have the second coming and a 1,000-year millennium, new heaven, new earth. I'm sure all this is quite familiar. So do we have one event or two? This depicts two. And what we're really asking is, are you splitting the information or are you going to join the information? Because if you join, you only have this one. Okay. 1 Thessalonians 4. The Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of a command, or with a shout, some translations have, with the voice of an archangel, sound of the trumpet of God. The dead in Christ will rise first, and we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. Okay? This is like one of the central passages to this whole debate. So we have a description of some sort of return of Christ here. And then you have Zechariah 4, which again, everybody, regardless of their view, believes is eschatological. Okay, it has to do with end times. Not the first coming, but the second. Then the Lord will go out, fight against those nations, fights on a day of battle. And here's the event. On that day his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives that lies before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall be split in two, from east to west by a very wide valley, so that one half of the mount shall move northward, the other half southward. Now, other than taking everything in here literally, especially if you do, the assumption is that this event is different than this one. Okay, because, well, here the feet don't touch the earth, and there's no, Mount of Olives thing, and, there's none of this splitting language and all that kind of stuff. So they must be two events. If we understand them both literally, especially, we would want to see two events there. Others would say, hey, this is just general description to indicate the cataclysmic part of the day of the Lord. This is the second coming. the Lord returns, and the nations are going to, the enemies of his people are going to get routed, and then he ushers in the kingdom, and there's blessing and all this stuff. Okay, they would say this is there's no reason to split them, let's join them. Let's just say that there are different elements in the two that describe the same thing. So who's right? Do I split or join? I don't know. Depending on what I do, will give me one event or two. So 1 Thessalonians 4, let's look at some other things. We have certain elements in this. We've got a cry, a command, archangel, trumpet, caught up together, meet the Lord in the air. So those are your elements in 1 Thessalonians 4. And lo and behold, we have those elements here in Matthew 24. Clouds, angels, trumpet call, gathering together of the elect, from one end of the heaven to the other. You say, well, what happened to the shout? We're missing the shout. Well, again, you got 4 out of 5. That ain't bad. Notice verse 30 comes after verse 15. Okay? So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. And let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. This comes after that. So here's the question. Does this refer back to this? If you say yes, you cannot have a pre-trib rapture. If you believe in a rapture, it can't be pre-trib because of the abomination of desolation. Again, and everybody who believes the rapture believes that the 70th week of Daniel, at the midpoint, you have the abomination. So this happens after. This is why pre-trib rapturists say, oh, this isn't the rapture, Mike. That's the second coming. The rapture's already happened before the tribulation. Oh, okay, if that's the second coming, why do we get all these things that are here? Is that the second coming? If you say that's the second coming, then why do you have a rapture in the first place? And you see the problem? And it's which ones to join and which ones to split. So you have two questions. The split or join question, fundamentally. And then when you make your decision to split, then the question becomes, which ones do I match up? Which ones do I align and which ones do I separate? These are arbitrary choices. Okay? If you believe in a rapture, okay? You decide, it gets down to you deciding the degree of sameness that you like, or the degree of difference that you dislike. I mean, these are interpretive decisions that are made inside your head, or that you hear from somebody else and they made them in their head. This is not easy. I mean, these are not easy things to decide. It's not self-evident. Let's talk about imminence, whatever that means. You really have three choices. Does imminence mean Jesus could return in the next eye blink? That is, there's nothing preventing it. There's nothing that has to happen. Right? Nothing at all, so that the Lord would return. Is that what imminence means? Does it mean that Jesus will return soon? There may be some things that still need to fall into place, and then the Lord will come back. Or does it mean Jesus will return unexpectedly? He'll be caught by surprise. Which one is it? Signs, such as the revealing of Antichrist, have signs in the sky, and so on and so forth, are relegated to the second coming only to maintain view number one. The only view of end times that says this is the pre-trib rapture. All other views of the second coming, whether they believe in a rapture or not, all other views of the second coming and or the rapture define imminence one of these two ways. The pre-trib position is the only one that says this. there are passages in 2 Thessalonians 1 that talk about how the man of sin needs to be revealed before the Lord's return. Now, a pre-tribber will say, oh, well, he's talking about the second coming. He's not talking about the rapture, because the Lord could come back at any moment. You see what I'm doing there?
His foot doesn't touch the earth.
Right. I'm self-styling. I'm filtering the passage through a position. And that's not a crime, because everybody does that, is my point. Everybody does that. If I don't believe in a rapture, I'd say, come on. The passage says that the man of sin has to be revealed first before the Lord returns. And I'm a joiner. I don't really care about the differences in the return descriptions, because I think, like the Gospels, I think they just relate parts of the same greater event. I join them. I only have one second coming. And so before that second coming happens, something will tell us, the believing community, that the Antichrist has been revealed. And after that, then I'm going to start looking like the Lord can come back, because this thing happened. Signs in the sky. Okay, Jesus in Matthew 24 talks about signs in the sky that would precede his coming. Well, Mike, that's only the second coming. That doesn't have anything to do with the rapture. Again, you see what I'm doing? I'm assuming two events before which nothing needs to happen. But if you put them together, you cannot say this. You not only cannot, you wouldn't. You just won't. You don't want to, because then that's your own contradiction. 1 Thessalonians 5 is kind of interesting. Go ahead.
In
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, he already done pointed it.
I heard a guy, he gave he called it the partial preterist view, and he said that parts of Matthew 24 were talking about the Romans destroying Jerusalem. Does that make any sense at all?
If you're a partial preterist.
Yeah. Okay.
It makes perfect sense if you're a partial and I'm answering it that way because that's the answer.
You have to filter it.
Right. In other words, if I presuppose that position, it makes beautiful sense. A preterism is the idea that, again, that a certain amount of prophecy, in that case partial, so he's not a full preterist, a certain amount of prophecy, even New Testament prophecy, has already been fulfilled. And the key event is usually the destruction of Jerusalem. So I get to a preterist position along the lines of certain assumptions, one of which is the book of Revelation was written before 70 AD. I have to have that to be a preterist in any sense. I must have it. Because if I don't, well then what's the sense of preterism? Then it's all this language doesn't pertain to the destruction of Jerusalem. It must pertain to something future. I've just blown my preterism apart if I don't have the book of Revelation prior to 70. And again, you can make arguments in favor of the book of Revelation being authored before 70 AD. Yeah, one of the key issues is there's a reference to the court of the Gentiles and the sanctuary in the book of Revelation. Well, this is kind of funny because the preterist has to interpret that literally. That has to be like the real temple, still standing. Because then the language is talking about Titus, and he's going to come in and destroy the sanctuary and all this stuff. Because if it's written after 90, I'm not talking about the real sanctuary, because man, that's history. It's 20 years ago. So there are little things like that, but you need that. So if you argue that and you like that, then what you just asked, that makes perfect sense. Every view can articulate itself extending from its own presuppositions so that it looks beautiful, beautifully coherent. How could anybody not believe, oh, it just works so well? Why is it that they all say that? Because they all make different presumptions. and proceed therefrom. And then they pretend, well, this is what the Bible says. Well, you're taking what the Bible says and you're filtering it through this thing. That's really where your position comes from. And again, that's not a crime. We all do that. The only way to not do that is just not to care. That's kind of where I'm at. Whatever. You know, I tell people I'm a pro-millennialist. I'm in favor of it. I like that idea.
Amen.
It's a little bit of a lie because, again, I think it's too restrictive, but, you know, they get the point. But, you know, if you really feel compelled, when I say I don't care, what I mean is I don't feel compelled to have to pick.
Yeah.
But if you feel compelled to pick something and enjoy it, love it, you know, live by it, that's great. It's just that what you need to do is you need to realize why you hold that position. You hold it because you've made certain assumptions and you're comfortable with them and it works for you, great. But so be charitable to the person who does the same thing but doesn't quite do it the way you do. Go ahead.
Excommunication. Every denomination in their creed takes a position, and if you don't march lockstep with them, you're going to be put on the rack.
Well,
I mean, they're not that charitable in churches.
a lot of churches aren't, but I think you're overstating the negative case because a lot of denominations will say something like, "We believe in the return of the Lord." Well, everybody believes that. In other words, I don't know that it's true denominationally because that's a big structure, but individual churches will wise up and make their doctrinal statements more broad to allow, you know, for disagreement. But you're correct, a lot of them don't do that. You know, and to be fair to them, they've made the decision as a congregation, or the pastoral leadership has made a decision that we are going to take this position and we're going to insist upon it so that people who come here are comfortable. In other words, if you come here, you know this position, and you like this position, that's part of the reason you're coming here. And so we're telling you we're not going to rattle your cage by bringing in a different view. Now, I look at that, this is just me, I look at that and say, I understand that, and that probably gives your people security, but it doesn't help them think. So I sort of gravitate toward the thinking is important, and we don't need to protect people from the Bible position. But at the same time, and I'm not being flippant when I say it that way, at the same time I understand that a lot of people, because of where they're at in their Christian life, or you know, a number of factors, they need that security. They need people to tell them the checklist. I understand that. What I want to hear from you, O holder of the checklist, is that you realize that that is not a growth position. That at some point, certain people will need more than that. And either you need to be willing to give that to them in some way so that you don't ruffle feathers over here, or you need to bless them and encourage them to go somewhere else. In other words, you know, don't browbeat them, you know, for needing more than that. And you're probably standing there thinking, boy, is that naive, you know. Yeah, it may be.
I think we need to get back to
Oh, yeah.
this.
Yeah, you're right. You're right, Sharon. Thank you for that. 1 Thessalonians 5. Again, we've read this a lot. Now concerning the times and seasons, brothers, you have no need to have anything written to you. You're fully aware the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. You know, people say there's peace and security. And, you know, we've all read the passage. But have you ever looked at the pronouns? Probably not. This is again, a geeky thing to do. Look at the pronouns and the nouns they're attached to. Now, concerning the times and seasons, brothers, I put brothers in red, and anything in red would be Christians. fellow Christians. Concerning the times and seasons, brothers, you have no need to have anything written to you. You guys know. You guys know all about the times and the seasons. For you yourselves are fully aware that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. When people, somebody else, the other crowd, are saying, oh, there's peace and security. Then sudden destruction will come upon them as labor pains come upon a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. But you are not in darkness, brothers. You won't be surprised like the thief in the night. You'll know, or you'll have some inkling. I mean, you'll have a sense of what's going to happen. For you are all children of light, children of the day. We are not of the night or of the darkness. So then let us not sleep as others do, but let us keep awake and be sober. Now, you could easily go through that, paying attention to the pronouns, and argue this. The first view of imminence does not describe the first view of imminence, that there will be things you see and know that precede, that inform you that the Lord is about to return. Okay? You say, oh, Mike, of course, that refers to the second coming. Of course we'll know, when the second coming, and whoever's on earth, people who get saved after the rapture, they'll know, because then there's the signs in the sky, and there's the revealing of the Antichrist. Okay, you've just assumed, again, that you have two events instead of one. Again, what I'm trying to show you is that you can go to these passages and you can filter them a variety of ways. You can parse them a variety of ways based upon, again, certain assumptions that are brought to them. Let's talk about the 70th week of Daniel. Is it fulfilled or is it future? Again, we have our pre-trib scheme up here. 7-year tribulation. This is the key concept that is attached to this whole 70th week of Daniel thing. And I have Matthew 24 here because, again, it's representative of this. There will be great tribulation such as not been from the beginning of the world. So the references to these great tribulation are in this view, the pre-mill, pre-trib, or any view of the rapture. You can have a mid-trib or a pre-wrath or a post-trib. They all want to see a specific 7-year period of tribulation after what is referred to as the church age, the current times, that there will be some indication that we've moved into a 7-year ticking clock time period. Okay? Now here's Daniel 9 with the 70 weeks. 70 weeks are decreed about your people, your holy city, to finish the transgression, this whole list. We have a reference to the 70. Bring in everlasting righteousness, seal the vision, and anoint the most holy place. Then down here, we have 62 weeks. After 62 weeks, it'll be built again with squares and open in troubled time. And the anointed one will be cut off after this 62. And then, I should say down here, there's one other week. Assumption number 1. The 70 weeks are 70 periods of 7 years. That's an assumption. And the 70th week is therefore 70 years. So if this is true, if the 70 weeks are 70 periods of 7 years, then the last one, logically, would also be 7 years. Okay? Here are 2 more assumptions. The Great Tribulation is 7 years long. Therefore, the 70th week of Daniel is the Great Tribulation. It's perfectly coherent in terms of its logic, but with any syllogism, you have to ask, are the premises sound? Okay, how sound are they? These 2 are the trouble spots. This one, most scholars would say, yeah, the weeks are 7 years. I'm not going to worry about that. And so that would mean the last one is also 7 years. Not everybody says that. I'll show you an exception, but most people do. These 2 are the trouble spots because if I click this, it would open up my software. If you search for the word tribulation in the New Testament, it never occurs with the numeral 7. There is no verse that defines the tribulation in terms of 7 years. That's a guess. It's an assumption. It's a deduction. Okay? And I added that search in here too, where I put in tribulation and 7, or the word week. They do not occur together. So here's the issue. I'm still going to believe that there is a tribulation, because Matthew says there's a period of tribulation. I mean, that much, it seems like I'm okay to say. Again, speaking as, someone who, wants to hold this view. So I'm gonna take that as a specific time period, and I'm gonna take it as 7 years, because that seems logical. Okay. Another view would say, I really don't want to take that position because I don't have a verse that justifies it. Okay? Both of them, I think, can be honest positions if the first one says, yeah, I don't have a verse, but I'm going to go there anyway because it seems reasonable. All right, well, I can see how it would seem reasonable. Again, you're making some guesses and deductive reasoning. Everybody does that somewhere, fine. What I want you to see is it's not self-evident. Assumption 2. This one's kind of mind-blowing. It's assumed that there was only one set of 70 weeks, and that set is 490 years. 70 weeks are decreed. And that 70 is later repeated, this is the assumption, later repeated here, 7, 62, and 1. That the whole description is describing the same set of 70 weeks. That's the 7 and 62 is 69 plus 1 is 70. So this is sort of gives you the whole number, and then it re-describes it down here. So we have one set of 70 weeks. What if, well, before I get to the what if, I might want to skip this too. If you take the one set of views, if you take the one set view, then you have to make certain other assumptions as to when it starts, when the 70 weeks start. And this people in the holy city, down in verse 20 or verse 24, the assumption is that finish the transgression, putting an end to sin, atone for iniquity. The assumption is that describes the crucifixion and the atoning sacrifice of Christ. So we need to have all of the weeks, either end with that or somehow revolve around this event. We're going to get to this assumption about whether this really refers to the crucifixion or not. Here are your options as to when to start the 70 weeks. Okay, let's just move on beyond that. Here's what I really want to get to. What if there are two sets? 70 weeks are decreed. And what if we assume that this is describing one series of 70 weeks and a series of events associated with that 70, and then we draw a line here, and this is another set? Then that means that this talk about the atonement for iniquity and all this kind of stuff does not refer, it cannot refer to the crucifixion and stuff like that, because that would be described down here, the abomination of desolation and whatnot. Or maybe it does, and then this has something to do eschatologically. There are just so many layers and positions you could take on this, depending on whether you see this as a summary and then this repeats that, or whether you believe they're two sets. Well, what's the right answer? I don't know. I don't. Could be either. If you take, if you do this division of sets, the first set, and you'll notice that it's only 70 years, and I'll tell you how they justify that. The first set refers to the exile, and then up to close to the time of Nehemiah. And then the second set would pick up from there and go to 490 years to the crucifixion. That's another way you can look at it. Isn't this fun? You just like 10 different ways to look at this. You say, isn't it cheating to have weeks in the first set only be 1 year per week for a total of 70 years? But then you have the second set be, 70 weeks of 490. Isn't that cheating? Isn't that kind of manipulative? Yeah, kind of. But there's actually a justification for it. First option, let's say there's chronological evidence that 7 refers to every 7th year of a sabbatical cycle. So 77s is 1 year 70 times. That's possible. Second option would be, again, there's also evidence from elsewhere in Scripture that a 7-year sabbatical cycle itself was considered 1 week. So then you'd have 490. Which one do I like? Well, it depends on which scheme I like. Again, I'm making choices. There's nothing that tells me you can't have this one, but you must have that one. There's nothing that tells you that. If you're going with the 1 week is 1 year, you'd go to Leviticus 25 and you do the whole every 7th year thing. That's the passage you like. And you get further justification from 2 Chronicles 36. He took into exile in Babylon those who had escaped from the sword. They became servants to him and to his sons until the establishment of the kingdom of Persia. This describes the exile. To fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah until the land had enjoyed its Sabbaths. Okay. 70 years. Right there. It says it, 70 years. And so there are those who would take 2 Chronicles 36 and the exile itself and the language of the Sabbaths and say that adds up to obviously 70 years. And the Sabbath week, every 7th year, 1 year, is what Daniel 9 is talking about. Okay? Sounds great. And again, for people who take that view, they can take that and then articulate and expand upon it through the rest of their eschatology, and it looks beautiful. It looks wonderful. Second option, this 490, you could also go to Leviticus 26 and do this. If in spite of this you will not listen to me, then I will discipline you again 7-fold for your sins. 70 times 7. 70 earlier in Leviticus 26 with the Sabbaths is 490. I like that one. I like that view. In fact, I like both of them so much, I'm going to choose them both and have 2 sets of 70. I mean, how do you know? How do you know? Assumption 3, verse 24 is about Jesus' atoning sacrifice. And because you got this, put an end to sin, atone for iniquity, bring in everlasting righteousness. Again, this is an extremely common assumption. Assuming we have 70 weeks, 490 years that end with the crucifixion, how does verse 24 work if it does in fact speak of Jesus' atoning death? So, what is the scope of Jesus' atoning death? What does it cover? Does it cover only the Jews? Because that's who the 70 weeks prophecy is aimed at, your people in your city. That's a new spin on limited atonement right there. It's only for Jewish people. Did the death of Jesus put an end to sin? Well, it kind of depends how you massage that idea. Okay? Did it really put an end to sin? I mean, what does that mean? It certainly didn't put an end to sinning. So, like, if somebody sins after the resurrection, then sin is still around. You see what I mean? I mean, how do you fit the language to what's going on? Did the death of Jesus atone for iniquity? This is the one, because it certainly seems quite clear, that leads people to latch onto this and then interpret the rest of them in light of that one. But when you get into this everlasting righteousness, seal up the vision and prophecy, anoint a most holy place, did the death of Jesus do this? Okay, did it bring in everlasting righteousness? Did it anoint a most holy place? Like, well, what would that be? The way you can understand this to atone for iniquity is if you take that view, the first view that the 70 is the 70 years of captivity, then this language is about the end of the captivity and the return to Jerusalem and the rebuilding of the temple to anoint the most holy place. And I can make a case for that. What if it was about the end of the exile? So we have the 70-year exile, finish the transgression, put an end to sin. Israel's forgiven. Okay? They're forgiven. The transgression is over. That's over and done with. Their iniquity has been atoned for. And to bring in everlasting righteousness, scholars would suggest that lasting vindication would be a better way to put that, based upon something going on in Daniel 8. To seal both vision and prophet. Whose vision? Which prophet? Well, the ones that prophesied about the exile. Their prophecy was fulfilled now. And the holy place is the temple. You see how you can coherently do that. So, which one is which? Go ahead.
Is there a connection with where in the New Testament Jesus talks about forgiving 70 times 7?
I think if there is an allusion back to that, again, based on the Leviticus thing, I think it would be by analogy, but that's also like idiomatic. It's a Hebrew idiom that shows up in other contexts. That means consistently and fully without reneging, on your forgiveness, that kind of thing. So I couldn't say with certainty that it's an actual reference back to that specific idea or passage. Another assumption. The anointed one of verse 26a, after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off. That must be Jesus. Okay, assumption that the anointed one of verse 26a is not the prince of verse 26b, the second half of the verse. So here we have, your 62, your anointed one, and then this prince. Well, in verse 25, both terms are used in the same verse. So the question becomes, is this two people or one? Do we have an anointed one and a prince? Are they two separate people? Or is this, pardon the grammatical speak, is this appositional? Is this just a way of describing that? Okay, depending on how you answer that, when you come down here, okay, you've got 7 weeks and 62 because they're going to be associated with this issue. Let's just go down here. You've got an anointed one, a prince. There shall be 7 weeks. Okay, let's go back to the chronology. Know therefore and understand from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed prince, an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Okay, so we've got probably one person here associated with one period. Then for the 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and moat, but in a troubled time. And after the 62 weeks an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city. So here's the question. Because this period was associated with both terms, should I take this period, the 62, and associate it with both terms as though they're one person like they were up here, or do I make them two people? Right. Okay, so this view is obviously splitting them. He shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and so on and so forth. So you have this issue, and again, this anointed one would be different than this anointed one. There are those who, though, because they see all this as happening not in the future, but in the period of Antiochus. Okay, remember the guy who goes in and slays the pig on the altar and stuff like that? They would say that you can, combine these things, and they would usually take these references here as some sort of chronological symbolism or something. And again, you say, well, that's a cop-out to say it's symbolic. Well, to some people it's not. You come down here and you have, one and the same. Who knows? Again, is this what we should do? Keep the colors the same? It's hard to know. So the questions, again, associated with this: why is there no verse that makes this equation? Why is there no mention of 7 years in the book of Revelation? Did you realize that? The book of Revelation never even talks about 7 years. Now it talks about 3.5s and 1260s, but then the question becomes, do I add them, or is it talking about the same set? I don't know. Right? And if there is a 1260, does that require, if there is a 3.5, does that require a 7? Again, you could easily say, well, yes, that makes sense. 3.5. Why would it be 3.5? And that is it coincidental that that's half a 7? Maybe we should be looking at this as a 7-year. I don't know. I don't know. I can go either way and make sense of it. As I go along, I make a series of assumptions and logical deductions. But there's nothing that actually tells me that in either direction. Again, no mention of weeks in Revelation. Boy, it'd sure be nice to have the word week show up in Revelation, if that was the point. Why is Daniel 9:24-27 never quoted in the book of Revelation? It'd sure be nice to have that, wouldn't it? You say, well, you don't need it quoted. You just kind of need like allusions to things in there, like oh no, wait, we don't have 7. We don't have weeks. Like what? You know what I mean? But what you do is you start with Daniel 9, and you work out a scheme so that you have a view of Daniel 9 in a broad sweep of activity. And then you take that broad sweep of activity, and then you take that whole thing to Revelation. That's how you do it. Well, it's cheating. Some would say it's cheating. Others would say, no, it's not cheating. I'm just taking a bigger view. Again, I can argue any side of this. Temple will be rebuilt. Oh, what could be more obvious? Basis for a literal temple. Well, everybody goes to Ezekiel 40 and 48. And they like Daniel 9:24 and 27 because, hey, it alludes to the ceasing of sacrifices and offerings, and you got to have a temple for that. Yeah, you do, but if you do, it gets destroyed. Nobody ever seems to see that, because they usually want the temple rebuilt for the millennium, okay, for the return of the King. And then there's this whole discussion: do we have sacrifices in the millennium or not? Why would we do that if Jesus is the sacrifice? Well, you need to step back here a little bit and realize that the temple here, and the word never occurs, but if the sacrifices and offerings speak of a temple, it gets destroyed. Right in the verse. Okay, so then we have a third temple, or actually be a fourth temple, because the next one will be the third if there is a next one. So how many temples do we need? And again, this is being a little snippy here, but I'm going to do it only for the sake of the illustration. How many temples do you need? As many as you need for the system to work. That's how many you need. You either need none or 2 more, or one. Again, you're extrapolating to make the system coherent. So on Ezekiel 40 and 48, well, it has dimensions. It must be literal because it talks about height and width and all this kind of stuff. It must be literal. Well, Ezekiel 43, again, right in that 40 to 48 section. Well, the man was standing beside me. I heard one speaking to me out of the temple, and he said, "Son of man, this is the place of my throne and the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the people of Israel forever. And the house of Israel shall no more defile my holy name, neither they nor their kings, by their whoring and by the dead bodies of their kings at the high places." So this idea right here, this is the place of my throne, the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the people of Israel forever. Same language is back here in Ezekiel 37. And again, this is the dry bones thing. "I will set them in their land and multiply them, and set my sanctuary in their midst forevermore. My dwelling place shall be with them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And the nations will know that I am the Lord who sanctifies Israel, when my sanctuary is in their midst forevermore. Universally taken as evidence for the rebuilding of a temple for the kingdom. This gets quoted in the New Testament. Unfortunately for some, fortunately for others. Again, it just depends on how you're going to construct your system. Paul, you're a mess. What accord has Christ with Belial? What portion does a believer share with an unbeliever? What agreement has the temple of God with idols? For we are the temple of the living God, as God said. I will make my dwelling among them, walk among them, be their God, they shall be my people. Again, this is all true, and again, this is all pertaining to the church. And so those who want to argue for a future literal temple will say, this is all true, but again, there's this already not yet idea. And so while this is not, we're not going to deny this, we're still going to expect a literal temple because of the references in Daniel and blah, 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 blah. I mean, again, you can go with any system you like. By the way, back here, we are the temple of the living God. Do you not know that you, plural, are God's temple? Again, Paul writing to the Corinthians. This is plural in the Greek, the pronoun. So it refers corporately to the group of believers there as God's temple, and God's Spirit is dwelling in them. And 3 chapters later, your body, these are singular. The Holy Spirit is within you. Okay, you're the temple individually. So you actually get both in 1 Corinthians. You get a reference to the corporate group of believers as the temple and the individual person as the temple. Book of Revelation, linear sequence or something else? There's 2 slides. Do I have time to hit this?
Yeah, it's 10 after 11.
Okay. There are 2 slides here. And this is something that is probably unfamiliar to most of you, and it'll take, I'm hoping that the way I've constructed it here, that you'll see this. This is Revelation. I've taken this isn't original with me. I got this from a commentary on Revelation. But it goes from chapter 6 to the end of the book. So it's the stuff after the letters, to the churches, the 7 churches. Now, you'll notice that there is patterning. Persecution, persecution, day of wrath, and salvation, and some scene in heaven. And then in a couple of places, that sequence is interrupted by the assembling of an army for a final battle prior to the day of wrath. But you can see there's clear patterning. What do you notice about the verse, the chapter references? Trace the flow of the chapters. Beginning up here. Which way do they go?
Up.
What do you mean by up? To go up, you first have to go. It goes this way. And it starts up here, comes back down. Starts up here, comes back down. Starts up here and comes back down. Up, down, up, down. What we usually do is we start here and we go straight to here. We go in a line. But maybe the book of Revelation is meant to cycle through the same series of events 6 times. If you read Revelation that way, you do not have a chronology of end time events. That just isn't the point of the book at all. The point of the book would be thematically talking about persecution of believers, and there's going to be a final battle, and God will come and deliver his people and destroy the enemy, and then we get to go to heaven. It just describes it 6 times. And they're not all the same, but they're very similar. So here's the question. How should I read the book of Revelation? And this isn't the only alternative system. This is probably the one that, given the way it's set up, you can see, creates a reading possibility. How should I read the book of Revelation? I just I thought it was like giving me this nice flow of everything that's going to happen at any time, one after the other. Maybe not. I don't know. Again, since every element isn't precisely identical, I'm going to be a splitter, man. I don't like that at all. I'd rather just read it chronologically, and they're all separate events, but maybe related, and it's a linear chronology. And then somebody else will say, "Oh, that's kind of cool. It's just up and down, up and down." That can't be coincidental. Who knows? But that dramatically affects the way you look at the whole book.